5. Santiago Flight 513. On September 4, 1954, Santiago Flight 513 left the city of Aachen in West Germany. The Lockheed Super Constellation plane was heading to Porto Alegre in Brazil. On board the aircraft were 88 passengers and 4 crew members. Each member of the staff was incredibly skilled and experienced, having carried out multiple long-haul journeys like this one before. This added to the shock when, shortly after takeoff, Santiago Flight 513 completely vanished without a trace. Families grieved the loss of loved ones, while air investigation crews searched the area extensively looking for clues. But nothing turned up, not even a scrap of wreckage, which would have at least let them know about the aircraft's fate. Our story now fast-forwards 35 years to 1989, when, on October 12th, air traffic controllers at Porto Alegre's airport were dumbfounded as a plane they weren't expecting and that was not on their radars at all touched down perfectly on the runway. The plane was much older than those that typically land at the airport, so it sparked confusion and interest, even more so when it was confirmed from the fuselage that it was from Santiago Airlines, a company that stopped flying years ago. Not only that, it seemed to be Flight 513. When officials got on board the craft, they weren't ready for the sight that waited for them. In every single seat, there was the skeleton of a passenger. But it didn't look like they died in a panic, since each one was sitting upright calmly, with their seatbelts still on. When they went inside the cockpit, the same could be said for the pilot, who still had both of his hands on the controls, as if it were just another normal flight. This story had been one that's captured the imagination of conspiracy theorists around the world, with many of them wondering if a rip in time or some sort of wormhole was responsible for the plane mysteriously disappearing and then returning 35 years in the future. But it is far more likely that the story is just a well-crafted urban myth. For example, there are no actual records that a company called Santiago Airlines ever existed. And even then, the airports it was supposedly flying from also don't really make much sense. Aachen Airport is very small, and it's not a place you'd typically go to take a long haul or international flight from, even back in the 1950s when the story of Flight 513 first started. There's also little official documentation on the flight or the events that took place. There are no aviation records of a Flight 513 for Santiago Airlines, and there wasn't any news coverage in 1954 or 1989 regarding its disappearance. The only known publication about the flight was released in a November 1989 edition of the Weekly World News, a paper that's well known for fictitious and sensationalist articles. To add on to that, it's pretty much physically impossible within the current laws of science as we know it for something like this to happen. The plane would have in no way had enough fuel to fly for 35 years straight, let alone enough for the passengers to have perished midair. They also would have been corpses instead of clean skeletons, since the controlled environment in the aircraft cabin would not have allowed them to decompose to such an extent. Although it's pretty clear that this was not a real event, it still inspires the imagination of people to this day, and is certain to force a chill up the spine of anyone you tell the story to. 4. Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart marked her place in the history books as the first woman to complete a solo flight across the Atlantic and the first person to fly alone from Hawaii to the U.S. mainland. Renowned for setting both speed and altitude records, Earhart aimed to achieve yet another milestone by becoming the first woman to circumnavigate the globe solo in 1937. Embarking on her journey with a navigator named Fred Noonan in a Lockheed Electra aircraft on May 20th from Oakland, California. Earhart made about 29 stops on the way, with their final recorded refueling taking place in Lae, New Guinea on July 2nd. Their next destination, Howland Island, was approximately 2,500 miles or 4,000 kilometers away. But after leaving Lae, contact with Earhart and Noonan was quickly lost, leading to a mysterious disappearance that has since captivated the world. Despite receiving intermittent voice messages from Earhart, there was a major issue when it came to communicating with the aircraft. The primary method of contact was Morse code, which neither Earhart nor her navigator Noonan were well versed in. The Coast Guard ship Itasca, stationed at Howland Island, awaited their arrival for refueling. But the lack of contact from the plane raised a lot of concerns. After no sign of Earhart's plane, searches took place to try and locate them, covering 250,000 square miles, or about 650,000 square kilometers of the Pacific Ocean. Sadly, the Navy declared Earhart and Noonan legally dead after 18 months, listing the explanation of their deaths as their fuel running out and a crash into the Pacific, despite no wreckage or bodies ever being discovered. Thanks to the fame and skill Amelia Earhart possessed, the unsolved mystery of what happened to her and Noonan still fascinates people to this day, mainly fueled by conspiracy theories and ongoing searches. One of the main theories puts forward the idea that Earhart crash-landed on the remote Niku Maroro Atoll, 400 miles or 644 kilometers south of Howland. In 1940, an expedition recovered human bones, including a skull on the atoll. Then, a 2018 study in forensic anthropology noted the bones' similarity to Earhart, with no remains of Noonan being discovered. Others suggest that the pair may have been taken prisoner by the Japanese and placed into a prisoner of war camp, but many have debunked this since there are no official records of their capture. Some of the most interesting details about the disappearance of Amelia Earhart are what distress messages and communications Earhart could have sent out around the time that she vanished. It's thought that there were at least 57 separate distress signals sent out by Earhart, which were picked up around the world. One of them, according to the Tig-Har Earhart Project's Richard Gillespie, reads as follows. "We have taken in water. My navigator is badly hurt. We are in need of medical care and must have help. We can't hold on much longer." Despite this, though, it seems like many of the distress signals were not ever acted upon at the time. So the mystery of what really happened to Amelia Earhart continues to be unsolved. What do you think happened to Amelia? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button while you're at it. 3. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739. On March 15, 1962, Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 left Guam. The plane had been chartered as part of the Military Air Transport Service, and 96 military service personnel were on board, many of them being skilled engineers, sharpshooters, and agents for the U.S. military. It's also worth noting that these were the early days of the Vietnam War, with historians marking Flight 739 as one of the first actions of the whole campaign. As a result, the plane's final destination was Saigon to help their government in the fight against the Viet Cong. 2 hours into the 6-hour trip to the next stop in the Philippines, the flight and everyone on board mysteriously vanished somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. A frantic search for Flight 739 then became the largest search for a missing aircraft at that point in history. 1,300 people, 48 aircraft, and 8 ships scoured over 200,000 miles, or about 322,000 kilometers of open ocean, with no trace of the plane. There were a few clues as to what may have happened to the plane. An oil tanker mentioned that in the early hours of March 26th, they saw a vapor trail followed by a bright flash and explosion in the sky that happened in 2 short pulses, in about the same location as Flight 739 would have been at the time. After the blast, they reported 2 things falling from the sky. Despite the report given by the oil tanker, the search for the missing Flying Tiger Line plane offered no results at all. Not even the faintest scraps of debris or an oil slick on the water from the plane's fuel were able to be found. At 8:22 a.m. on March 16th, everyone on board was declared lost, since no sign of the plane was anywhere to be found. The most logical time of their demise would be when their 10 hours of fuel ran out. The true nature of what those on board were meant to be doing in Saigon is still a mystery, just as much as what happened to Flight 739 itself. Even to this day, the names of everyone lost on that day are nowhere to be seen on the official memorial to the Vietnam veterans and the fallen soldiers in Washington, D.C. 2. Stendeck. On August 2, 1947, British South American Airways Flight CS-59, or Stardust, was hurtling towards the ground in a surprise crash landing. The Lancastrian aircraft was on its way from Buenos Aires in Argentina to Santiago, Chile, when it sent this message to Chilean air traffic control in Morse code. ETA Santiago, 1745 hours, Stendek. While the first half of this message makes perfect sense, there was some confusion as to what the aircraft meant by the second portion, Stendek. They would never get the opportunity to ask the crew and clarify exactly what they'd meant, since the plane never arrived at Los Cerrillos Airport, and instead seemed to vanish without a trace. This sent conspiracy theorists into a frenzy, especially off the back of the flying saucer encounter that had supposedly happened in Roswell, New Mexico, just a few weeks prior. The obsession with Stendek was born. The word was even used as the title of the new UFO magazine. The mystery of what really happened to the plane finally started to unravel in 1998, when mountain climbers who were scaling Mount Tupungato stumbled upon the wreckage of the plane. Thanks to the icy conditions on the mountain, much of the site was still intact, including the body parts of those who'd lost their lives in the crash. Further investigations found that Flight CS-59 Stardust was caught up in a snowstorm with a powerful jet stream. This led the crew on board to think that they were much closer to Santiago than they truly were, which would explain their ETA in the Morse code message. As a result, they began their landing descent, which meant that they'd crashed into a mountain that they thought they had already passed. But what about the strange message Stendek? It turns out that the letters used in this cryptic clue are exactly the same ones used in the word descent, just scrambled around, which would make sense considering the fact that they were preparing to land. But the radio operator on board, Dennis Harmer, was incredibly experienced and would be very unlikely to make this error. Many theories have since emerged, including that perhaps the crew were confused because of a severe lack of oxygen, something which has been refuted as due to the type of aircraft. They would have all been wearing oxygen masks. It's believed that it was a hurried acronym to describe their landing, and possibly even a mix-up of the words Stardust and Descent. But to this day, no one really knows the truth. 1. Lady Be Good. Lady Be Good, a B-24D Liberator aircraft, took off from Soluk in Libya on April 4, 1943. Along with a few other bombers, the goal was to fly in waves over the Sahara across to Naples, Italy. But many of the planes in the formation were forced to turn back, thanks to the strong desert winds. But Lady Be Good pushed on through it all. Being one of the last planes to leave, Lady Be Good had to play catch-up with the other bombers that left earlier on. It was on the return journey back to Soluk that things started to go wrong. Lieutenant Hatton, one of the 9 people on board, radioed through Soluk Airfield for help, since the plane's automatic direction system had somehow malfunctioned, leaving them in need of navigation help to get back safely. Sadly, this assistance never came, and Lady Be Good never made it to the runway, overshooting Soluk and disappearing altogether. Afterwards, with searches yielding nothing, everyone on board was considered lost, most likely by crashing into the Mediterranean Sea. In November 1958, a team of British geologists working for the Darcy Oil Company discovered the wreckage of a crashed plane while flying over the Libyan desert. The plane was quickly identified as Lady Be Good. Reporting their finding to Wheels Us Air Force Base, military officials conducted an investigation in May 1959, which concluded in August that same year. Despite extensive ground and air searches of the wreck, the original search yielded no trace of the crew. Equipment like parachutes, flight boots, and arrowhead markers was recovered, suggesting the crew's attempts to mark their trail along the way. In February 1960, British petroleum employees rediscovered the abandoned crash site, leading to the recovery of remains belonging to 5 of the crew members. A subsequent joint military effort, named Operation Climax, located 2 more members. Unfortunately, Sergeant Vernon Moore's remains were never found. Using information from Operation Climax, military investigators were able to finally piece together what happened to the plane. The crew's tragic fate unfolded after Lady Be Good, low on fuel and disoriented in the pitch-black dark, overshot its destination. Believing that they were over the Mediterranean, the crew bailed out, surviving the jump but landing 15 miles or 24 kilometers from the crash site. Stranded in the middle of the desert, They walked 85 miles or 137 kilometers, with exhaustion claiming 5 lives. The remaining 3, unable to find help, also perished not long after. Remarkably, Lady Be Good stayed well preserved in the desert, stocked with survival gear and rations that could have kept the crew going. The intact radio suggested that had the men searched for the plane instead of looking for the airbase or signs of civilization, they might have possibly survived. Thanks for watching. Which one of these plane mysteries were you most fascinated by? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this one. We'll see you next time. Bye.